What is your greatest story? One time my younger brother was vacuuming the house and came across a large huntsman spider. Instead of trapping it or killing it or telling literally anyone else in the house, he decided to just suck it up in the vacuum and be done with it. He left the vacuum with the bag still inside in the laundry while we went on holiday for a couple of weeks. We returned to the house infested with tiny spiders. We started killing them. They started getting bigger. Eventually, we had to have the house fumigated. For added horror, feel free to Google image search Australian huntsman. And keep in mind a full-sized one of those bad boys can be as big as your hand. Edit. People commenting that they're brothers because they eat bugs and aren't venomous enough to kill you. There are also giant hairy beasts that stick to your skin if they land on you and run faster than my dog. Y'all need Jesus.
That's a wild story. Your brother really thought he solved the problem. But yeah, that's not how it works. Vacuuming a huntsman? Bold move. Coming back to a spider invasion must have been a shock. Fumigation is no joke. It's funny how one decision can lead to a bigger mess. I'll skip the images, but I get why people wouldn't want those guys crawling around. Sometimes the simplest choices have the messiest outcomes.
I was fishing with a friend in a small pond a few years ago. My friend cast out a few times and went to reel in, but he snagged something about halfway back. He thought it was just a branch or some weeds, but when he pulled it up out of the water, his hook was embedded in the balls of a 10-inch purple dildo that was burned on the end for some reason. I thought that was pretty hilarious, and I'll probably never forget it. TLDR, dildo fishing.
That's a wild story. Fishing usually brings up calm vibes, but finding a dildo definitely flips that. I can see how that would be something you'd remember. It's funny how the unexpected happens when you're out doing something pretty routine. Just goes to show, you never know what you might pull out of the water. I think that would make a great topic for a funny fishing tale.
Was asked to dress as a whale mascot for a parade. Rode on the bumper of an ancient fire truck on the oldest day of the year. Some combination of CO and heat caused me to begin projectile vomiting within the costume. Then I passed out. Luckily, I had my flipper secured enough to keep me on the truck. Last thing I heard was, "Mommy, what's wrong with that whale?" as I began dangling unconscious for the remainder of the route. Came to as they were loading us into a flatbed to get back to our cars. Dad made me ride on trash bags home. 20-plus years ago, I can still smell the moment.
Sounds rough. Dressing up in a costume like that can be brutal. The heat and everything made it really tough. It's wild you passed out, but at least you stayed on the truck. That line from the kid is kind of funny but also sad. Getting loaded onto a flatbed and riding home on trash bags is definitely one way to remember it. Some experiences just stick with you, for better or worse.
Short version. I came back to the US after living in England for 4 years. My friend failed to meet me at the airport, so I rented a car to drive 50 miles to my home. Confused by the new construction around the airport, I stopped at the first gas station to ask for directions. Me, how do I get to the main road going east? Clerk, if you go east, you'll go into the ocean. He pulls out a map, and surely enough, I had flown into Charleston, South Carolina, not Charleston, West Virginia. I spent the night in a motel and flew out the next day with a good story and minus $300 in my pocket.
That's one way to kick off a return home. You expect your friend to be there, but then you're left figuring things out alone. Renting a car and asking for directions seems simple, but that mix-up with Charleston is a solid reminder of how geography can trip you up. Spending a night at a motel just adds to the adventure. At least you got a story out of it, even if it costs you a bit.
I was 17 going clubbing with friends who were all 18. I have a somewhat late birthday, and 18 is the legal age here in the UK, and was using an ID that looked a bit like me that my brother had found on the floor. I had already had ridiculous amounts to drink and stumbled up to the bouncer and gave him my ID. My actual ID. The confusion on his face made me realize this, so I slurred out the words, "Oh, sorry man, wrong one," and proceeded to swap them around. I don't know why I thought that would work. Needless to say, it got confiscated. At least I got a free ride home from the police.
That's wild. I've had a couple of close calls with IDs too. Once I tried to use an old one at a bar, thinking it might pass. The bouncer just looked at me like I was joking. It's funny in hindsight, but in the moment, it was pretty nerve-wracking. Getting a ride home from the police must have been a real buzzkill, though. Live and learn, I guess.
Mine is something that happened about a week ago. A woman got out of her car, she was the driver, and then looked me right in the eye and started screaming about how much of a fucking asshole I was. I had never seen her before, and I had just turned out of my neighborhood, so I didn't do anything to anger her. Everyone around me in the other cars looked just as confused as I was, so I just started laughing and she just got back in her car. The rest of the ride to the gym was normal. I will likely never get an answer to this.
That sounds pretty wild. Random encounters like that can really throw you off. It's funny how people can react so strongly without any context. Just laughing it off is a solid way to handle it though. I guess you'll never know what was going on in her mind. Sometimes people just have their own stuff going on, and it spills over. Anyway, at least it made for an interesting day.
I went to a private boarding school, and the food was horrible. We had a town trip every week, but it was limited to seats on a small bus, so you had to sign up. If you weren't there when the list came out, you did not get on. My friend was an RA, and always put me on the list with the other RAs. When I got into town, I would beeline to Togo's and buy 3 to 4 foot-long subs. At the time, that was $1.16 for the lot. When I got back to school, I would cut them into 1-inch slices and sell them for $3. All gone within the hour. A 1-inch slice doesn't seem like much, but Togo's subs then, pre-yum buyout, were packed and on thick rolls. I did this nearly every weekend and always had cash.
Sounds like you found a way to make the best out of a bad food situation. Your friend helped you out, and you turned those subs into a solid side hustle. It's smart to capitalize on what you had. Selling those slices for $3 must have felt great, especially knowing you had it all figured out each weekend. Who knew Togo's could be such a game changer for you?
Well, there were 4 guys at my school who used to smoke weed and then drive to parties or somewhere. One night they came to a roundabout traffic and one of them had the glorious idea. "Hey, we never ever drove in a roundabout backwards." "Yeah, let's do that." So they turned the car, kicked into gear and drove in there. And sure enough, they hit another oncoming car. They were completely fucked, stoned out of their minds and freaking out. Not long after the police arrived, but the officer went to the other car first. Well, after a few minutes, the cop comes to the 4 guys and tells them, "Well, boys, you can go." The other guy is pissed drunk and claims that you drove backwards into that roundabout.
That's a wild story. I can't believe they thought driving in a roundabout backwards was a good idea. It's crazy how that all worked out for them, though, getting off the hook just because the other driver was drunk. Just shows how sometimes things can turn out in unexpected ways. You can't help but wonder what was going through their minds at that moment. I guess they learned a lesson that night, hopefully.
I've always loved a bit of a flutter, so I had this grand plan since I was 18. At roulette table 22, on my 22nd birthday, on the 22nd of the month, I planned to put $22 on number 22 at 22:22, 10:22 p.m. I got there at 10:15, and me and my mates were waiting for the glorious moment. A few of them were yelling, it's time," but my watch said 10:21, so I said I'd wait. The croupier spins it up, says no more bets, and ding, 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 it lands on 22. Everyone was shocked and frankly annoyed at me for fucking it up. But I was a bit drunk and rather cocky, so I simply said no, now it's 10:22, and place my bet. The ball spins and lands firmly in 22 again. We all went nuts, even the croupier. cashed out my $770, and hit the bar. Best story of my life so far.
That's a wild story. Timing everything to hit that number on your birthday must have felt like a scene straight out of a movie. I get why your friends were mad at first, but hitting it like that twice is just crazy. Seems like the place just wanted to reward you for your patience. Cashing out and heading to the bar after is the right way to celebrate. Good times for sure.
I taught English with the Peace Corps in southern Ukraine. My town was in a small agricultural center in northern Crimea, and I had to take a bus to get to a train station. This old babushka got on the bus one day, and this drunk guy yelled at her. She handed me her box of ducklings and threw a cabbage at him. The cabbage hit him square in the face and knocked him out. Best grandma ever.
That's an interesting story. I can imagine that must have been quite the scene. You don't expect a grandma to be that fierce. The image of a cabbage taking out a drunk guy is something you'd remember for a long time. It's cool how people can surprise you with their actions. Definitely a moment to share with friends later. That babushka sounds like she knew how to handle herself.
My ex dumped me before I went to Air Force Basic. Her reasoning is that I would be away from home a lot for long periods of times. I go to Basic and she ends up dating an Army guy. Army deploys for a lot longer than most Air Force jobs. Well, they date for a bit, but he ends up breaking up with her. The reason they broke up is because he ended up coming out of the closet to her once he found a boyfriend.
It's kind of ironic how things turned out. You think you're going to be the one away for a long time, and then she jumps into a relationship that ends up falling apart. Life has a funny way of showing how plans can change, especially in the military. It's real how people make decisions based on distance, but sometimes those choices don't work out in the long run.
My wife and I were scheduled to fly to New Orleans 3 days after Katrina hit. Needless to say, we had to reroute our destination. For a $50 rebook, we settled on Cancun. We had flown out of Charlotte and were about an hour into the trip. The pilot came on the intercom and told us to look out the left side of the plane, and we could see the space shuttle taking off from Cape Canaveral. Pretty cool all by itself. 10 minutes later, he told us to look out the right side, and we were passing over an enormous hurricane. I think it was Rita. Both of those in one flight 10 minutes apart was pretty amazing.
That sounds like quite the trip. Rerouting to Cancun must have been a nice surprise after the change of plans. Seeing the space shuttle from the plane is not something you hear every day. And passing over a hurricane right after? That's a wild experience. Definitely a mix of emotions on that flight, but it seems like it turned out alright in the end.
On middle school, there was a couple kids who were really into all Japan-related stuff. They were kind of weird and outsiders, but actually really good kids. They never had anything against anyone, but sadly a couple known bullies had a habit of picking on them. One day I saw, again, those bullies picking on those Japan kids. So, I decided I had enough. I went to those guys and asked them nicely if they could stop picking on those kids who never bothered anyone. They attacked me physically, and, well, I had to use my own physical force against them. There were 3 of them bullies, and I managed to beat 2 of them to ground. Third one ran away. I got expelled for 2 weeks. When I got back to school 2 weeks later, everyone called Tetsu. I found out that those Japan guys had named me that. Everyone has called me that since. After that event, everyone stopped bothering those Japan guys. A couple years ago, my friend told me that Tetsu is apparently Japanese and means iron. Apparently, they gave me a pretty badass nickname.
That's an interesting story. Standing up for those kids shows some real character. It's not easy to step in when you see bullying, especially if you're outnumbered. Getting expelled must have been tough, but it seems like it changed everything. It's cool to have a nickname like Tetsu that actually means something, too. It sounds like you made a difference not just for those kids but in how others saw you as well.
Back when I was a kid, my dad was in the Army. I was living in Germany at the time. My dad was working at a different base for the week. Friday night came along, and he got invited to take a helicopter back to the base we lived on to get there Friday night at a decent time. Alternatively, he could take a van and get back in the middle of the night. He had some work he needed to finish up and opted to take the van. Well, the helicopter ended up having a mechanical failure, crashing and killing everybody aboard. This is before cell phones, early 90s. From all accounts, my dad had taken the helicopter. We get a call late to inform us there was a crash, but they could not confirm if my dad was in it. We were all worried, crying, etc. My dad ends up getting home in the middle of the night, and we were all up/asleep in the living room. My dad had not heard about the crash and was curious why we were all up. I remember that feeling I had when he came in the door and we realized it was him. It was an amazing moment.
That's quite a story. It's wild to think how close things can get sometimes. Your dad made a choice that night, and it turned out to save his life. Must have been a mix of fear and relief when he walked through that door. It sounds like a moment that really stuck with you, realizing how fragile things can be. Glad it ended well for you all.
When I was around 18, I went to a golf club at midnight with some friends. We went around the course hitting golf balls for maybe an hour until we reached the driving range at the clubhouse. After maybe 15 minutes, a pickup truck with large spotlights on the truck bed left the nearby road and drove onto the grass towards us. We panicked and split up, running in different directions. I ran in a circle around the clubhouse courtyard and then jumped into a bush and hid as the pickup truck drove by me. After a while, I was able to get away from the area and saw police motorcycles driving along the road. We found out the club had some break-ins prior to our little adventure, so they were on high alert. A couple of my friends that ran a different direction tried to walk through some fields that turned out to have electric fences, so they got zapped trying to cross it.
That night felt like a scene from a movie. Just a bunch of kids thinking it was funny to hit golf balls at midnight. When the truck showed up, it was panic mode. I just remember feeling smart hiding in that bush while my friends were out there trying to escape. The electric fence story adds a twist. I guess we really didn't plan for the consequences. Just another wild adventure.
My dad had me climb into an attic over his friend's garage to clean it out. I've never been in an attic before and wasn't told that you need to stay on the rafters, so about 5 minutes into the job, I fell through the ceiling and landed on top of my dad. I was in a cast for the whole summer, but hey, I've got this story.
That sounds pretty wild. It's funny how some simple chores can lead to unexpected events. Falling through the ceiling must have been a shock for both you and your dad. A summer in a cast sounds rough, but at least you got a memorable story out of it. It's those kinds of moments that stick with you, even if they're a bit painful at first. Glad you can laugh about it now.
I once met Jim Carrey when I was 8 years old on a trip to Florida. I ran up to him and proudly proclaimed, "I saw your movie." And he grabbed his chest and yelled, "You saw my boobies?" And I said, "No, your movie." He then shook my hand and told me, "I saw your movie too, and it was very, very good." It's funny because now I'm getting ready to head to film school.
That sounds like a cool encounter. Meeting someone like Jim Carrey at that age must have been memorable. It's interesting how that moment stuck with you, especially since you're heading to film school now. It's like a little push from the universe, or something. I guess we'll see where that takes you. Hope you enjoyed the journey.
I was but a wee lass learning how to fish with my family. We were out on our janky little boat, and the sun was setting over the water. My aunt says, "Last cast of the day. Make it count." I was very determined to do so. I cast so hard that I threw my little ass out of the boat with the rod. I crossed lines with my cousin, and he reeled me back in. He got the award for biggest catch of the day. TLDR, got 2 turnabout fishing, fell out of a boat.
That's a solid memory. Trying too hard to make that perfect cast can lead to unexpected outcomes. It's funny how your cousin ended up reeling you in instead of a fish. Guess he was the real winner that day. Sometimes, it's not about the fish but the laughs that come with fishing trips. Moments like that stick with you.
This is a story a friend of mine told me, and I've never forgotten it. So, they're on vacation, and one of her friends decides to go take a shower, or so they think. He's actually taking a bath. The light switch was on the outside of the bathroom, and they decide to play a harmless prank on him. The classic, turn off the light while you're in the shower. Well, apparently as they turned off the light, his head was underwater and his eyes were closed. So, as he arose from the water, it's pitch black and he is convinced that he has gone blind. He flails around and jumps at the tub and proceeds to thrash around the room screaming for help because he's gone blind. Best story I've ever heard. I've retold that so many times.
That's a wild story. I can totally imagine the panic that set in. It's crazy how a simple prank can take a turn like that. You'd think he would have realized it was just a joke, but being in the dark and disoriented, I guess it makes sense. It's those unexpected moments that stick with you for sure. Definitely a memorable vacation incident to share.
So a long while back, maybe 20 years now, I was walking in the woods in a park with my young family. We stopped in a sunny spot on the trail to watch a woodland butterfly prance about the leaves of a small sapling. After a moment, the butterfly took an interest in my younger son, who was maybe 5 years old. It started flying all about him. I told him to put out his hand into the sunlight and hold it real still. Sure enough, the butterfly landed on his outstretched hand. All 5 of our lives paused for a long moment in time. The look of wonderment on my son's face will stay with me to my last day. Rare indeed are the moments of magic.
That sounds like a great memory. It's interesting how small moments like that can stick with you. Watching a child experience something like that is pretty special. It's those little pauses in life that really matter. Just a simple reminder of the beauty around us. Definitely a memory to cherish. Moments like these feel timeless, and it's cool how they can create such a lasting impression.
My dad's auntie lived in Canada. She had relatives there and here in the UK, and both weren't exactly fond of each other. When the auntie died, both the relatives here and in Canada wanted her body to be buried where they lived. They couldn't agree. It resulted in her body being chopped in half and the legs being flown over here to be buried in the UK and Canada keeping the top half. I just can't work out who got the better deal.
That's an odd situation. It's strange how family feuds can get so intense, even after someone passes. Chopping up a body for a burial sounds extreme. You'd think they'd find a compromise instead of taking things so literally. I wonder if they ever talked it out, or if it just became a messy dispute. In the end, all that drama over a person who's already gone. Just a lot of unnecessary trouble.
My driving test story for what it's worth. Back out of parking space. Turn right out of parking lot. Road is empty. Yellow light about 1 block away. Just go through it, left turn into business park another block away. Pull up to the curb aka. Parallel park, U-turn aka. 3-point turn, right out of business park. Road is empty. Yellow light again, just go through it. Turn into DMV lot, nose in park. Congratulations, you passed. Watch examiner rush to the bathroom.
Sounds like a pretty straightforward test. Just a regular drive with a few turns and parking maneuvers. Passing is a relief, but the examiner rushing off probably meant they were feeling the pressure too. At least you got your license without any drama. Just another day in the life, I guess.
Aren't Australian huntsman spiders supposed to be like total brothers though? IRC, their venom doesn't affect humans. They live off of pests like cockroaches. They don't frequently make webs, and they're terrified of people, so you don't have to worry about them getting close to you. In fact, they're so scared of people that Australian huntsman bites are incredibly rare, and the ones that do happen are frequently an accident due to mishandling of the spider. They look scary, but they actually just want to be friends forever. Don't judge a book by its cover.
I remember a time back in college when a friend found a huntsman in his room. He panicked at first, but then he just watched it for a while. It started moving around, and we ended up naming it Browski. Instead of killing it, he gently caught it and let it go outside. We joked that it would be our ultimate pest control. Sometimes, things that seem scary can be pretty chill if you give them a chance.
I have a similar story. We have an outdoor mall in my town, and it has a couple soda machines that take credit cards. I was going around trying out a card I know only had 43 cents on it, and no, I couldn't afford the $1.50 bottles of soda, but was bored. One worked, was surprised, and tried again. It worked. Used a Costco gift card just for fun. It worked. Used my driver's license. It worked. So of course I used the Costco card and my friends, and I emptied the machine at 10 at night. We got the cops called on us because someone thought we were breaking the machine. We got pulled over leaving and were told to wait there while another car checked on the machine. It was physically fine, so no reason to keep us. The cop asked why we got so many sodas from the machine, close to 100 of them, and I said I had a lot of change to use. The machine worked for a couple months, and I would stop by and get a couple sodas once or twice a week. I went one day and it was being worked on, so I left. It didn't work when I tried again. Got 120+ free bottles of soda.
That's a pretty wild story. Just using random cards and finding out they worked is kinda funny. I can see how the cops would get involved when they saw you guys with all those sodas. Can't believe the machine let you take so many for so long. It must have felt like a little win until it got shut down. Free soda is always a good time though.
My son did this, fortunately he was intercepted. It was just the two of us in the house, and he was happily pottering around the living room watching TV and playing. So I put my head down on the sofa and had a nap. I wake to a strange man's voice saying, "Hello," and I realize the voice is coming from our open front door. I jolt into full consciousness as I realize the front door is not meant to be open. Turns out my son had figured out how to open it from the inside and just decided to go for a walk. He was about 2.5-ish, and dressed only in a nappy. Someone saw him as he rounded the street corner onto a fairly busy road, saw the open door, put 2 and 2 together, and brought him back. I am forever grateful to that man for saving my son from my extreme dumbassery.
That's pretty intense. It's scary to think about a little one wandering off like that. I can imagine the panic you felt waking up to a stranger's voice. Kids can be pretty clever at that age. It's good that someone noticed and helped out. Definitely a lesson learned about keeping the door secure, no matter how relaxed you think you can be. Glad everything turned out okay.
I have a friend that got special permission to work from home because he was a good programmer and he was moving to another city to be with his wife. Well, after 6 months, they decided to move back. He didn't tell his boss and now works from home. Been about 10 years. Every now and then they insist on a face-to-face meeting. He drives to the airport and have them come pick him up from his flight.
That's pretty funny. Your friend managed to pull it off for so long. I guess he found a way to keep his job without moving back. Kind of clever to pretend to travel for those meetings. Must be nice to work from home for a decade. I wonder how long he'll keep it a secret. Makes you think about how far people go to maintain a job and a lifestyle.
I've got a similar story. While my mom was pregnant with me, my dad dropped a heavy speaker on his head. He got a CAT scan or something to check for bleeds in his brain. They found a brain tumor. If they hadn't caught it so early, it easily could have killed him. But fortunately, it was early enough for them to remove it, and he is fine now.
That's quite something. It's interesting how life can change with one random event. Your dad's situation could have ended up bad, but it sounds like luck was on his side. Early detection really makes a difference. It's great to hear he's fine now. Life has a way of reminding us to be grateful for small things.
One of my best friends got blackout drunk, passed out, standing up. As he fell, he had but a porcelain sink, slicing his head open. He turned and landed on his back, and the largest sink chunk hit his head and sliced it open. Again, at the hospital, they did an MRI to make sure his brain was okay and found the tumor that would have killed him. We call his borderline alcoholism during college a blessing now.
That's quite a wild story. It's crazy how things can turn out. A night of drinking ended up saving his life in a way. You never really know what can happen in those moments. It's a reminder to be careful, but also that sometimes bad situations have unexpected outcomes. Glad he got the help he needed. Makes you think about those college days differently.
Similar story here. I was chicken fighting on a balance beam with a kid when we were around 9. I pushed him off and he broke his arm. Upon closer inspection, a cancerous tumor was found in his shoulder, and he was able to receive treatment much earlier than he otherwise may have. Full recovery.
That's kind of an intense story. It's wild how a childhood accident can lead to something unexpected like that. It's good that he ended up getting treated early and fully recovered. Makes you think about how life works in strange ways sometimes. Kids just want to have fun, but things can take a turn quickly. Glad it turned out okay in the end.
Something very similar. My grandfather had a seizure a couple of years ago at a gas station. They took him to the hospital and gave him all the scans that found a brain tumor, which they believe was the cause of the seizure. They were able to remove that, but then in further tests, they found cancer in his lungs, stage 4. 2 years of chemo and radiation, and he's doing great. His cancer is in full remission. Smiley face. Glad everything worked out for you also. Smiley face. Edit, chemo.
That's a tough situation. It's always scary to hear about health issues, especially with family. Your grandfather going through that must have been hard for everyone. It's great to hear he's in remission now. It can be a real relief when things turn out better than expected, and it shows the value of medical intervention. Sometimes life throws curveballs, but recovery gives hope.
I just recently finished my second student teaching placement, in which I had a very surreal moment of discussing 9/11 and the impacts/implications that it carried for our world. The surreal part was that some had no idea what had happened. Everyone had heard of 9/11, but to many it was just something that had happened in the past. They were 1 year old or younger when it happened. Still blows my mind whenever I think that it has been that long. Thanks for this first-hand account. It gave me goosebumps and a very interesting perspective on the events.
It's wild to think about how time changes our understanding of history. I remember discussing big events in class too, and realizing some classmates couldn't relate. For them, it's just a topic in a textbook. It makes me reflect on how experiences shape our views. Those conversations become crucial in helping younger generations understand the past, even if they weren't around to see it. It's a strange yet important cycle.
Oh God, my high school was nothing like this. We went to nationals for the Future Farmers of America competition, livestock judging, in Indianapolis, which was just about the most boring town ever. When not in competition, we had one rule, and that was that you had to have one person with you at all times. Otherwise, the teachers basically told us, here's my cell phone number, don't get lost. We had no boys alone with girls in their rooms with the door closed rules, but genders could cohabitate all they wanted as long as the doors were open. Yeah, a couple of the 18-plus kids tried to go clubbing, but were thwarted by the fact that Indianapolis is a very boring place.
That sounds pretty standard for high school trips. My friends and I had similar rules. We went to some state conference, and the fun was mostly trying to sneak off to grab food without getting caught. The teachers were always worried about us getting lost, but that kind of made it more entertaining. People always try to break the rules, but it usually ends in a dull, quiet night anyway.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.